Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's video is going to be my May wrap up. In terms of books by the numbers, I did do really well in the month of May. I read 12 books, 11 of them were fiction, 1 was nonfiction. I've got some middle grade, some YA, some adult titles. Let's just go ahead and get started because this is a lot of books to talk about. I've been kind of back and forth whether to keep splitting my wrap-ups up, and I think I am going to do that next month just because I'll have like a mid-month wrap-up and that'll be around like 6 books, and then my wrap-up at the end of the month will also be 6 books. I feel like that's a lot more manageable for me to talk about at one time and make sure that I'm giving in-depth reviews while not making this video like outrageously long. So I think for June I am going to go back to the mid-month and then end-of-month wrap-ups, but you get all of the books today. So I am going to start with my nonfiction book of the month that I read. I try and read one every single month. I'll get into some comfort reads. Those I'll just briefly touch upon and not talk about too much in depth. And then I'll get into my fiction reading of the month. I'll go from my least favorite to my favorite book of the month. So for my nonfiction book this month, I read Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America by Ijeoma Oluo. And this is, I am going to read a detailed synopsis of this one just because this is, I feel like, really important. I just want to get all of the nuances in the synopsis down correctly before I go into my thoughts. So this book is talking about a brief history of white male America and an indictment of what it has cost us as a country, socially, economically, and politically. This goes over the last century of American history and talking about the white patriarchy's deliberate efforts to subvert women, people of color, and the disenfranchised. So this kind of goes through America's growth as a nation, from immigrant migration to the shaping of economic policy to the protection of socio-political movements that fortify white male power. It starts very far back in our nation's history, talking about Buffalo Bill and how the West was won and those exploits up until modern day. This was released December 1st, 2020, so it is fairly recent when talking about modern day politics and modern day policies. I really enjoyed this one. I would highly recommend this book. This is from the same author of So You Want to Talk About Race. I know that was a title that was really circulating last year. I have not actually read that one yet. I believe it's designed as more of a workbook, interactive book. This one, I listened to it via audiobook. The author does narrate this herself and it is a very powerful audiobook experience. I would recommend you picking this up, especially if you read the title and maybe get offended by the title or just have like a knee-jerk reaction of what do you mean by that when you read the title, because it is really talking about a system upheld and a system being put into place, and it is talking about how white male supremacy not only harming people of color, women of color, the disenfranchised, women in general, queer folks, but also cis white straight men who don't meet the perfect model and then are told if you are not successful it is because someone else has taken it from you and not because our system is fundamentally broken in a lot of ways and built upon these really entrenched terrible structures. I really recommend this book. I really don't think anything that I can say would really add to the conversation in a way that this book didn't already do so much better. So I would recommend you listen to this book. And just like my final closing arguments, not arguments, but my final closing piece of advice, a quote if you will, to leave you with for this book is just because you have privilege does not mean that your life has not been hard and that you have not had your own struggles, but your privilege means you have fundamentally never had to experience barriers that other people have, just simply based on skin color, sex, sexual identity, gender identity. So it is a tough read at times. It's not fun learning about the ways that our country has failed so many of our citizens, but overall I think this ends on a hopeful note and things will get better. And you know, if we don't talk about the problems, how are we going to fix them? But if we're talking about the problems, we're talking about these discussions, engaging in debate, actually listening to people that have been impacted. I definitely think that we can, as cheesy as it sounds, make the world, at least the US, because this is what this book is talking about, is through a US lens, but make the US a better place. Now, completely doing a 180, moving on to my comfort reads. I read several of the Warrior Cats books this month. They're just bringing me a lot of joy. I don't really have too much to say about them because it is now a very long continuous universe with, I believe, 5 or 6 series out. Each of those series has 6 different books, so I'm just gonna go through, for title's sakes, all the books that I read. So I did finish up the very first series. So I read book 4 in that series, which was Rising Storm. I read book 5, which is A Dangerous Path, and then I read book 6, which was The Darkest Hour. I wrapped up that main original series. It was a very nostalgic time for me. I really enjoyed all of them. Out of those 3, I'd probably say my favorite might have to be A Dangerous Path, either that or The Darkest Hour. And then I was only planning on wrapping up that series this month and then maybe reading another one in June, but Thrift Books did come through with a free book credit for me, so I did pick up The Sun Trail. This is Warriors Dawn of the Clans, book number 1. This is the prequel series. I have not read this series before. I stopped reading these books originally before this one came out, so I did read this one for the first time. I think I will be trying to collect these. I do use Thrift Books to buy books a lot, and they do have a really cool system of when it comes to rewards points and then receiving free books. So I did get this for free and I did enjoy this. This is very interesting. I tend to be very hit or miss on prequels, but I had a fun time with it. I will be continuing on with this series in June. Now, moving into my fiction picks, unfortunately, my least favorite book of this month would be Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This is a Greek myth retelling. It follows the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, along with a few others, but through the point of view of Ariadne, our title character. I wanted to like this book a whole lot more than I did, and I really thought at the beginning I was really going to like this one. Part 1 I thought was good. This was the part that retold the Minotaur myth, and I had already read that myth before. I just hadn't read it from Ariadne's perspective, so I did enjoy the first part, and this is actually part 1, part 2, part 3, so it was very easy to kind of see the journey of this book. But part 1, I didn't necessarily feel like it added anything new to the story, even though it was told by a different point of view. Part 2, I did really enjoy. There's actually 2 points of view in part 2, and alternating between those 2 points of view, I really enjoyed. It did go through more myths that I was not as familiar with, so that was definitely my favorite part out of this whole entire book was part 2, and it did read very much like a Greek myth. Really reminded me of Circe, especially because, without giving spoilers, I feel like it's Greek mythology, so it's not really spoilers, but Circe and this book both take place for a large amount of time on an island, so I did really enjoy the second part. However, part 3 really lost me, and I had actually read some more of the myths that were talked about in part 3, and in addition, since mythology is so old, there are different interpretations of the myths, and I've actually read interpretations that I thought were better than the one in here for some certain myth, which I think is important to state because this describes itself as a feminist retelling of Ariadne's story, and I felt like I had read some of the original mythology that actually did a better job than this one did, just with some of the choices in part 3. I just wasn't a fan how certain things were interpreted, and I felt like for a lot of reasons the characterization in part 2 really broke down and completely changed in part 3. So I mean, I think you'll really like this if you really do love Greek mythology. It does read exactly like a Greek myth, which was really cool. It really brings you into that time period. So while I did enjoy this one, it was just a little bit of a letdown for me. Definitely nowhere near as good as Circe or other Greek myth retellings that I've read before. So while I enjoyed this one, I definitely think the hype got to me on it, and I just ultimately didn't end up loving this one as much as I thought I would. Next up, we have Seven Devils. This is by Laura Lamb and Elizabeth Elizabeth May. This is the first in a, I'm going to call it, new adult space opera duology, and the second book is coming out, I believe, early 2022. This is about a group of rebel fighters that are banding together to fight an evil empire. Very much Star Wars feel to it, and very much a Star Wars feel in terms of it is very space opera-y. At times, it almost feels more fantastical than science fiction because just you really have to suspend your disbelief for a lot of the technology. A lot of the tech and the science used in here is not really the most technologically sound, which is fine because I mean it's all science fiction, but there are definitely some more like science fiction books that really go into what seems like very plausible and very likely scenarios that would actually make sense in a way. A lot of this just didn't logically make sense if you're thinking about it with like scientific lens, but it's a space opera, so that's not really the point of this type of science fiction. I did enjoy this one. I will continue on with this duology just to see how it wraps up. This one was a little weird for me just because some of the things about the ending I didn't so much care for, and then I thought the middle had some pacing issues. I did enjoy it overall, and this book does have about 5 point of view perspectives, and it would alternate chapter by chapter. And I will say, while that was an interesting concept, I really don't think this book, I mean, it is almost 400 pages, but I still don't think that that is enough time to have 5 main points of view and really flesh out the characterization. I'd say this is definitely more plot heavy than character heavy. I just felt like you spent so little time with each main character that you didn't really get to know any of them as much as you would like it to. Also, this might just be on me, but I really feel like this book was marketed as a sapphic enemies to lovers story. At least when it first came out, it's definitely not that. So I guess just keep that in mind. Again, it might have been only me, but I feel like that was thrown around a lot when this came out. It is definitely sapphic. There is a lot of representation for sapphic women in here, as well as there is one main trans character, but it's not enemies to lovers. And I actually didn't really care for the romance in here. I felt like it was very, very insta-love. And I feel like with any multi-point of view book, there are some points of view that I really did prefer and like over other ones. However, I did have fun reading this, and I know I just kind of went over like a lot of maybe more negative points, but I had a lot of fun reading this. This was a blast. It definitely had that Star Wars space opera feel, and I am excited to pick up the next book in this duology. Next up is Darkest Hours Expanded Edition by Mike Thorn. I did make a dedicated review video for this book, so I won't spend too much time on it here, but this is a horror short story collection. It is filled with body horror and creature horror, cosmic horror. I really enjoyed this, not for the faint of heart. If you don't like body horror, you will not like this. A lot of these short stories really read like Goosebumps stories for adults with the pacing and like the twists at the end. I really enjoyed this one. The author did send me a copy to review, so very thankful for that. But if you are looking for a solid short story collection that does have a lot of nostalgic feel to it in terms of like 80s horror movie, 80s horror culture, I really enjoyed this one. With any short story collection, there were some that I enjoyed more than others, but there were definitely more short stories that I enjoyed as opposed to ones that I didn't care for so much. So I do think if you like horror, especially cosmic horror or body horror, this would be a good collection for you to check out. Next up, we have Imposter Syndrome by Kathy Wang. This is a story that deals with espionage in Silicon Valley. It follows 2 main points of view. One of our points of view is a high up in this tech multimedia conglomerate. She's the president. She is on top of her game. She runs a lot of business in Silicon Valley, but she's also a Russian spy. Our second point of view is a worker who should be working at a position higher than what she is. Her education and her job experience does not reflect the lowly position at this company she is in, and she's actually working for the company of this Russian spy. When she discovers something that she was not meant to see, she has some heavy decisions about her future at the company and whether or not she should come clean, and even if she's able to come clean, if anyone will believe her. So this is like an espionage thriller, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a thriller. It is definitely character based, but I really enjoyed it. It's like a high stakes cat and mouse where it is very political in nature, and it is very much like mind games as opposed to like spy action plot. This is also a really interesting satire and social commentary on big tech and also just security and privacy as something, a commodity that can be bought and sold by these companies. There's also talks about the American dream and how accessible that is depending on what you look like, and the differences between intersectional feminism and girl boss feminism. Yeah, I did just really enjoy this. I would hesitate to say pick it up if you think it's going to be a thriller. I am just saying it's a thriller because I really don't know what other category to put it in. It's definitely more of like an espionage situation, but very character driven, not as much plot driven. So if you do typically like thrillers and you are looking for a book that kind of reminds you of thrillers, but you're looking to kind of expand to maybe more literary books where the pacing's a little bit different, like I feel like for traditional thrillers, there are lots of chapters, very short chapters with like a cliffhanger on the end of each chapter. This has longer chapters, there aren't as many big cliffhangers, so I did really enjoy this one. This was a pleasant surprise. Next up we have Insomnia, and I did make a reading vlog entirely dedicated to this book, so again, I won't be spending too much time on this one, but I did enjoy this one. I know this is one that doesn't get a lot of hype in terms of Stephen King books, but this is about a man named Ralph, and he has recently lost his wife, and he begins to have trouble sleeping. This trouble sleeping slowly dissolves into insomnia, which when he starts seeing some truly bizarre things in and around his neighborhood when he is awake, he starts to suspect it might not just be insomnia, but something a little more sinister. I really enjoyed this one. This does take place in Derry, Maine. It does have a lot of nods to it, as well as the Dark Tower series. Also a little bit of a Pet Cemetery Easter egg in there as well. I mean, it's almost 800 pages, I think 800, 900 pages, something like that. Definitely could have been trimmed a little bit if I'm being very nitpicky, and this is also one where I feel like is very character driven. There is a plot, but there's also a lot of like introspection between the plot, so I did really enjoy this one. It's a very solid King installation. If you do like the books that start like they seem to be more of like a thriller or a crime novel with no supernatural elements and then it turns supernatural, if you don't like that, I wouldn't recommend you pick this up. I wouldn't compare this to The Outsider in any other way other than the fact that it does seem run-of-the-mill, not run-of-the-mill, but very ordinary crime, and then it turns into supernatural, so I would recommend this one. It is just a little bit dated at times because it has come out, I believe, like 20 or so years ago. It came out in 1994, so about 27 years ago now. Overall, this was a fun reading experience, and I do think this is one of King's stronger endings, so the hefty page count I think is definitely worth the payoff that you get at the end. And for the two top things I read this month, they're both novellas, so color me shocked. I am normally all about the big books, the big tomes, but I've really been enjoying shorter form fiction lately, which is a surprise to me, but I'm having fun with it. But the next book I'm going to talk about is The Dawn Chorus by Samantha Shannon. This is a novella that you do not have to read to enjoy the Bone Season series. It does take place between books 3 and 4, but it is very character driven. There is no plot. This is just examining Paige's mental trauma and her mental health between the very harrowing events that happen in the 3rd book and kind of setting her up for the 4th book. I really enjoyed this. I really love when fantasy does talk about mental health, because the things that happen in fantasy books would absolutely take a toll on your mental health, especially in the Bone Season. Paige goes through it a lot, so I just really enjoyed getting to see this one shot of Paige and of Warden and just kind of going through through exploring trauma together, trying to get back up on her feet, because at the end of the third book, Paige is, I'm nervous for her for the fourth book. So just being able to read kind of where she's at, getting ready for the fourth book that I am reading in the month of June. I just really enjoyed this one. Again, Samantha Shannon has said that you don't need to read any of these novellas to enjoy the series as a whole, and they are very character driven and not plot driven, but I did really enjoy this one. I thought it was very beautiful and very touching. And the last book that I have on my list is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. I've been sleeping on Becky Chambers. I have known for a couple of years now that I feel like I would really like her work. And I've just never gotten around to reading her books before now. And wow, I was missing out. I really enjoyed this one. So this is a standalone novella. She also has a series, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, that I do plan on picking up soon because I absolutely loved this one. This follows a group of astronauts in a kind of near future Earth. They are on a mission to kind of just explore the universe, obtain scientific knowledge, because in the future, space exploration is completely crowdfunded by people who just want to learn more about the galaxy that we live in, and really just going for the pursuit of knowledge. Space travel is a non-profit, so we're following 4 astronauts on this journey as they're going to different planets, exploring new life. It is very character driven, and honestly, again, I don't feel like too much happens in terms of huge plot twists or plot events. You're just following this crew as they travel from planet to planet and experiencing along with them what they learn there and what they see there. And it's just, I loved it. I really loved it. It was beautiful. I'm really excited to read more from Becky Chambers. This is very short. The audiobook's only about 4 hours, but in that course of 4 hours, I did really feel for our main character, and just some of the passages were so moving, talking about just the human experience and just the pursuit of knowledge. Like, if you are a nerd who just really loves the pursuit of knowledge as a concept and just humanity being at its greatest when we are learning things for the sake of learning, I think you're really going to resonate with this book. I really enjoyed it. The audiobook was really good as well, especially because I am interested in a lot of these scientific things, but there are a lot of scientific terms and words being thrown around because they're scientists on a mission. They're categorizing the different life forms that they see on these planets in very scientific ways. So I feel like I would have stumbled a little bit reading those had I been reading it physically, but I really enjoyed listening to it via audiobook. It's also told in a way where our main character, Ariadne, side note, it's really funny, I read 3 books this month where characters were named Ariadne in them, which is wild. But our main character is writing a message and sending it to Earth from her spaceship. So she is talking to you, the reader. So I do really love audiobooks for that kind of experience because it really heightens the fact that I feel like someone is talking to me. So I just really loved this one. It was really beautiful. It has me very excited to pick up more of this author's work. It was the perfect balance of very technical and very high science fiction, and then just beautiful and moving and lyrical. I just highly enjoyed it. Beautiful writing style. I will be checking out more by this author. It may be too soon to say it, but I'm just gonna throw it out there. She might become one of my new favorite authors if I really enjoy the Wayfarers series. And there you have it. Those are the 12 books that I read in the month of May. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe for more content from me. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye!